Welcome, all you plus two comedy modifiers, back to Blueprints. We join back with my live stream already in progress.
Read that.
Welcome, all you plus two comedy modifiers, back to the stream. Not really stream, pre-recorded stream. Welcome back to Blueprints. TV's Noah here in the reading hoodie because we have to continue to read The Curse of Black Bridge. So, once again, when you see me in the reading hoodie, that means that I'm reading. And also the green screen doesn't work. And when you see me not in the hoodie with a working green screen, that means that's live gameplay. I think you're smart enough to understand that concept, but I've already committed to this bit. So here we go. Part 2, Below Black Bridge. So to recap, we have a boy from a group of thieves who went berry picking and then ended up finding a driver who was carrying some sort of strange effigy, and he robbed the man, took the effigy, and then was cursed, and now will die when he takes 12 steps. He burned a few steps getting to the carriage and rode away, and is now trying to figure out how to deal with this new cursed life. Let's continue reading. Miller awoke to some light nudging from a familiar foot. Oh, light nudging, not sunbeam, whatever. Only one person would have the cheek to awaken her in such ill-mannered fashion. Shaking the sleep from her eyes, she gleamed up at him in the darkness, but did not say a word. He nudged her again, teasing, then stepped back into the dim. After taking a moment for her eyes to adjust to the darkness of the cave, Miller remembered she was on the third watch today. Quietly collecting her things and wits, Miller turned as she left, waving to her young friend, who was more than likely already asleep. She crept through the cavernous main passage, careful to not wake the sleeping bandits around her. Like a hero in a book, she often mused. Quietly, she grabbed a bow from the haphazard formed pile of weapons, shaking the accompanying quiver in the darkness to assess how many arrows it held. She then walked towards the sun-drenched mouth of the cavern, ready to start her shift. Above her, in one of the few trees found in the cavern, Miller could see that Rivera was already posted. She waved and Rivera waved back. Calling out to each other was strictly forbidden. Anything louder than a gesture in the canyon was forbidden. When Miller reached the tree, Rivera lowered the braided rope and pointed to the ground behind her. Miller turned, following the finger, and saw a pail of water resting beside a nearby log. She turned back to Rivera, nodded, and secured the pail to the rope. The pail went up first, and in turn, Miller followed. Rivera reached across and grabbed the water. Miller leaned back to give her space. There was not much room for maneuvering in the tree post. A necessary concession for the concealment of the outpost demanded. Rivera tilted the pail up to her mouth dramatically, illustrating how thirsty she had been. Miller laughed silently as water poured out, splashing onto Rivera's face. It was a bit too daring and noisy of a joke, and had the others been around, they would have certainly been scolded for the unwarranted sound. But Miller appreciated the efforts Rivera took to verbalize the silence in the morning. They had been on third watch together for over a month, and during the speechless time, their friendship had grown into something special. Affection was unsurprisingly scarce among the unholy hounds. She had felt camaraderie before, of course, but intimacy? Never. From their elevated vantage point, the girls could see both the concealed entrance to the cavern as well as a clear view of the bridge that had spanned across the canyon. Black Bridge was the link between the Gentry lands and the northern mountains, the overpass that connected Orris and Reddington. I feel like that's very key information for me. That Black Bridge is what links Orris and Reddington. I feel like that's like might have been something that'll show up on the test, the final exam. Spoilers. To the city-faring travelers of the realm, the bridge was an unavoidable crossing. In the day, the task was to ensure the travelers passed by without stopping. At night, the task was to ensure that they do. That they do stop, and that they rob them. Got it. Like most of her band, Miller preferred the night. The biting glare of the sun meant be tolerable to the farmlands and bricklayers, but to a cavernous house bandit, it was a source of constant annoyance. In the day, they were no shrouded to conceal her expressions nor to hide her thoughts. She felt exposed. Can you tell it's early for me? Can you tell in my voice that it's early? Rivera touched her elbow and pointed up. Miller, striving to suppress a budding smile, suddenly shook her head in response. There were many signs that the unholy hounds used in lieu of words, but the two of them had developed an extended vocabulary. Gestures quietly forged in the shared solitude of their months among the branches. She watched as Rivera shifted, placing her palms flat on the floorboards beneath them. Miller knew what she was trying to say, but shook her head a second time. It was more fun to pretend not to understand. Rivera rolled her eyes and turned away, looking back to the canyon. Squinting through the leaves, the two girls held still, watching and listening. It was not long until Miller, too, heard the sound approaching. So I guess maybe they were saying, do you hear that? I'm trying to think what that could have meant. Elbow, then up, and then touching the floorboards. Rivera held up two bent fingers. And a few moments later, two men emerged from the bridge's southern end. They were dressed in a familiar uniform, long gray coats with black-facing white waistcoats and black tricorn hats. They belonged to the local patrol, the Black Guard. Although not an everyday occurrence, the presence of the Black Bridge was not an unusual sight. It typically indicated an important traveler impeding passage across the bridge, information that the girls would promptly relay to their leaders as soon as the coast was clear. But this report, while exciting, was rarely acted upon. In Miller's 5 years in the Unholy Hounds, she had never once seen a carriage taken in open daylight when the Blackguard was nearby. The men had nearly reached the bridge's north end when Miller heard the horses, faintly at first, but growing louder with each passing movement. Rivera's eyes met Miller, the same concern mirrored in the other's expression. They did not sound like the typical carriages, cautiously approaching the bridge to the cross. Instead of the familiar crunch of high-hoarded gravel, they heard the harsh clattering of hoofbeats against stone. Both girls quickly redirected their attention downward, looking through the foliage. The sound was not coming from the high road, but from the canyon itself. The horses were coming from below the bridge. In an instant, Miller had nodded an arrow and drawn her bow. Go. Rivera had gone before the whisper had even left Miller's mouth. The young scout was already sliding down the banks below, racing towards the cave. There was no road that ran below the canyon. There was no reason for numerous horses to be approaching the cave. There was only one reasonable conclusion. Both girls had reached it instantly. The base had been compromised. This was a blackguard attack. The moment the horses came into view, Miller let loose her first arrow. She was surprised to see a carriage. She had expected cavalry, but before she even finished processing that thought, her second arrow was in the air. Without a trail, it would be unthinkable for a carriage to traverse such rough terrain. Yet she watched as the wheels jolted over the rocky riverbed. Well, this is our thief friend who stole the carriage and is bringing it back now. That's what makes the most sense here. A third arrow was now in flight, and there would be no need for a fourth. The driver slumped over just moments before the vehicle dripped into a small ditch, slammed into the embankment, and the force of this sudden halt immediately shattered the front two wheels and catapulted the driver from his seat. Utterly confused now, Miller quickly glanced over her shoulder to see if any horses were also approaching from the rear. Down the canyon, the entire horde of the unholy hounds came spilling forth from the earth, as if hell itself had suddenly sprung open. The group seemed even more bewildered than Miller, half asleep and tripping over one another in a desperate attempt to engage an unseen enemy in combat. Miller could see Rivera coming among their numbers, the only one looking up at her. Her expression was chilling. There would be no need for a silent gesture to convey what they were both now realized. They had made a mistake. It's cool when you have the dramatic irony, you know. The gang's chieftain, Joffrey Heartslasher, that's his name? Joffrey Heartslasher? Led the others, cautiously approaching the crashed carriage like a suspicious fox would near a baited trap. There were no words exchanged as the group crept forward in customarily silence. A dozen or so paces in front of the wreckage lay a far-flung driver, an arrow protruding from his broken body, and besides him a blood-stained effigy carved in stone. That's what we thought. Miller was inconsolable. Jesper, that was his name. His name was Jesper. Had always been her favorite. He had always shadowed her in the night, clinging to her hems of her every move, the way a child tails behind an older sibling. Tender-hearted, she had always called him, though deep down she had known that wasn't quite true. His appearance of gentleness concealed a raw, resilient durability that emerged in the most perilous of situations. He had been a flower among the nettles of this cave, but he had still had thorns, horned by a grim paths of hundreds of hands of misfortune. They buried him in the darkness, in the back of one of the large cavern rooms. He was interred with a berry basket and a silk handkerchief that he had treasured. A silk handkerchief. That's kind of new, right? Like the berry basket makes sense, but why is he being buried with a handkerchief? I'm just worried that means something. The mysterious effigy had found beside him served as a distinguished gravestone. A marker that stood out as somewhat special among the rows and similar swords marking neighboring plots. No one spoke, not even in whispers. There was nothing to say. So the effigy is his gravestone. Miller awoke the next day to a thunderous shaking and rattling of the earth, a far cry from the playful nudging of the previous day. She had strained to adjust her eyes, but the choking sting of stirring up dust caused her to flinch. Panic was also in the air. The sound of scurried footsteps and clattering feet filled the space around her, but even in alarm, the silence was louder. What was it that sounded so strange? Miller closed her eyes tightly and used her feet to guide her along the passage. The whispers around her were getting louder. The intense voices could be heard ahead, louder speeches than she had ever spoken in the canyon. A growling grew a Miller's approached the. I'm bad at reading. A growing dread grew as Miller approached the mouth of the cave, her eyes now open wide despite the dust. Shouldn't it be day? Miller felt a hand in the darkness pulling at her. It was Rivera. The two embraced, and Miller did not need to see her to understand. Rivera placed two bent fingers against Miller's cheek, and with that touch, two against her face. Trash trucks back, just to make this consistent. Miller felt the same sinking feeling from the previous day. Two bent fingers confirmed that Miller had suspected. The girls had forgotten to relay one critical piece of the information to the others. An hour or so later, the screams began, blood-curdling cries of hopeless desperation. Captain Fordick Lee of the Blackguard looked down from the ridge of the canyon and collapsed the entrance to the cave. Ah, he grinned. Now they speak. So, because they were focused so much on the horse and carriage, they forgot that there were two blackguards on the bridge that then saw them all come out of the cave. And that is the end of the story. So, here's the thing that I find very suspicious about this. The effigy was placed at the tombstone of Jasper, which means somebody touched it. So that means that person would have died in 12 steps as well. You could argue that they did because of the cave-in, I guess. But that means that effigy is still there, and, someone could gather it, and it could be used to kill people in 12 steps. Here's the thing. The only people that knew about the effigy in the story are Jasper and the man he stole it from. Now, we don't know what happened to the man he stole it from, but it's very likely that he survived and could be the one who told the tale of this boy that robbed him. He wouldn't then know his name. He wouldn't know his name was Jasper. There's enough to put together the story from an outside point of view if the driver that originally carried the effigy survived and then, told the story, and then the blackguards went looking for the caravan, and then they saw them coming out. That all makes sense. But in this story, we know Jasper's name, we know Miller's name, we know Rivera's name, despite the fact that they never speak in the story. And since they end with them being buried, how do they know their names? So it's a little difficult to believe how true the story is. Like, I understand that this is kind of like a Paul Bunyan-esque myth, but it is a bit odd that we have all the details of the unholy hounds rather than having the details from the people dealing with the unholy hounds, because they would be the people who know the story because everyone else didn't survive. unless it's going to turn out that somebody, escaped to tell the tale. The things that I think are important that we need to take from this is that this means 2 blackguards. I think this is an important thing. I bet this is a hand signal we see in a picture or a painting at some point. I think it is important to know about this effigy. I'm very sus of this effigy. Just because you can tie the idea of the effigy to yourself. Because there is the idea that you have a limited number of steps. So I find some similarities there. So that could be part of it. I think the fact that the bridge connects Oris and Reddington is important. That sounds like a test question. And Captain Fordic Lee of the Blackguard. We have a name of one of the Blackguardsmen. So we have like a credible person who could be the one who tells this story. It's weird that this is a story that's passed down and stuff, because it's just kind of a bummer. And really unsatisfying when it comes to what happens with the effigy and if the effigy works. I guess you could argue he died in 12 steps still because he got shot with the arrow, and like it's not like the Kill Bill exploding heart, it's just like the universe knows you have 12 steps left, and those last steps were spent flying out of the carriage. That's just another idea. I find the book interesting. I don't know how to apply it other than the idea that they're test questions. It would really suck if I took the test before reading the book. Like, if only editor knows this information and player it doesn't. Wouldn't that suck?
Read this. There you go. I hope you enjoyed reading that, Noah. We're going to keep playing. No. We could do the bookshop. I think we do the bookshop, and then we bounce out of here. I don't have nearly enough money to do anything with the bookshop, but.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Blueprints. Will I find my way to room 46? Well, the best way to find out is to subscribe right here to +2 Comedy Gaming, so you'll get a notification next time I dive deep into the mansion. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.